Well, it's my privilege today to continue on our Super Ordinary Heroes series. Did I say this in the right order? Super Ordinary Heroes? Yeah. We started 2 weeks ago with Alan Meyer, and if you haven't watched it or haven't been here, I highly recommend it. There was so much beautiful prophetic symbolism that he pulled out of that story that I've never heard before, so really recommend it. And then last week we had this dashing, good-looking, energetic young man, which I would marry. I have! Talk on David, and that was a very, very good message as well. So today we're going to look at Ruth. And the book of Ruth is a book you go to when you have certain questions, when you are not sure where is God in my circumstances, when you are heartbroken, devastated, when you don't know what is going on, when you wonder if God is in control, when you maybe feel like a little bit of an ordinary person and you don't know where you fit in this whole big grand scheme of God's redemption plan. It's a beautiful, encouraging book. It gives you a little bit of dating advice as well, and romance, and you have the whole package with this book. It's a book of encouragement, and that's why we do these character studies, because the Bible says in Romans 15 that these things are written for our hope, to give us hope. Because in them we learn from those superheroes' failures, and we learn from their successes, and we also see how God is, how his character is, and how he moves in people's lives. And we know that he's the same yesterday, today, forever, and that all these things are for us as well, right? So we're going to look at Ruth, and we're actually going to encounter 3 different people. We're going to meet a godly, sort of good-standing farmer, a daughter-in-law, and a mother-in-law. I know, I don't know about you, your mother-in-law, but my mother-in-law is absolutely awesome. She's turning 86 this year, but yeah, no, she Zumbas every one of you out. She is just amazing in her energy. She's looking after herself. She's right plugged into a church, active member there. She has so many people that love her and follow her and are with her, even though she never had the title of a leader. She definitely is a woman of prayer. She has this sort of attitude, well-known attitude, that she says, we'll see about this when something happens that she doesn't quite agree with. This woman prays and stuff is happening. I know that we are the beneficiary of many blessings because of her. I know many protections because of her, many leading and guiding, and all the rest of it because of this woman's prayer. And she reaps the harvest already in her lifetime, in her children and her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren as well. So in summary, my mother-in-law is an angel. I heard 2 men talk to each other once, and one said to the other, my mother-in-law is an angel. And the other one said, gee, you're lucky, mine's still alive. My mother-in-law was always supportive, even though we moved the whole family to Australia. And even though I married the baby of the family, little baby Marcus, mothers can be very clingy to their baby boys, but she never was. She was super supportive. Actually, I get bigger presents than Marcus to my birthday, but don't tell him. He doesn't know. We do this secretly. I show you a picture of her. My mother-in-law's name is Ruth. And Ruth means, I know, loyal friend, and that's who she is. There's a picture of her. That's my mother-in-law, Ruth. That's her baby boy, and that's my baby boy. And she truly is my superhero. This woman has gone through very difficult times during the Second World War when she was just a little girl. And she had it very hard in midlife, where she had a sickness that nobody could sort of diagnose. They didn't know what was wrong with her. My husband was only 5 at that time, and the doctor says she will just die. Prepare for it. And then they found a new young doctor in town, went to him, and he did some tests, and they found that she simply had gluten allergy. It's easy these days, but in those days it wasn't. You just simply died, So she went through difficult times in some family settings and friendship settings, but this woman never complains, ever, never, ever. She trusts in God wholeheartedly, and I just want to dedicate this message to her, my beautiful, super ordinary hero. Is that all right? Love you, Ruth. So we're going to start in Ruth 1, chapter 1 to 7. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Kilion. They were from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab to live there. Now Elimelech, Noah's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Kilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. What a tragic, tragic story. We see the setting of the book of Ruth in the first sentence there. It says, in the days when the judges ruled. And if you have ever read the book of Judges, you would probably agree with me that it is a triple R-rated book. Some of you are now keen to go home and read this triple R-rated book. It is really, really terrible. The stories in there, the behavior between men is horrible. I think Ellen Meyer touched on it a little bit. There's the story about this man who cuts his wife into pieces and sent the pieces to the 12 tribes of Israel. It's just horrible. And, you wonder how this can be. How can people be so evil and so nasty towards each other? And the answer you find when you come to the finish of the book. Sorry if you haven't read it, but this is the finish line. It says there that in those days they had no king. Everyone did just what they thought pleasing in their own eyes. And so this book, when we read it, we have to read it in mind to see this is what happens to people when they are without a king, when they are without rules, when they are without a law, when they are without God. This is the extent of evil we are capable of doing when we live without God. And then in this backdrop, we find the story of Ruth. And it's beautiful because it gives us hope in the sense that you can find yourself in the same context of a situation, but the content of your life can be so different. They found themselves in the context of when the judges ruled, but we're going to see how the content of their life was so different. You can find yourself in the context of a family setting where everyone is against you, where they are, persecuting you for your faith. You can find yourself in the context of a workplace like that, or uni, or you name it. But still, you do not have to be affected. The content of your life can be so different, and that's beautiful, isn't it? Amen. So we hear there that this man moves from Bethlehem because of a famine, which is interesting because Bethlehem means house of bread, and they move to Moab. And at first glance, you think, well, fair enough. They were hungry, they had nothing left, so he moved. But really, it's interesting that it's stressed out here specifically, this country of Moab, and we come to this all the time, because it was actually outside the boundary lines that God has given for his people at that time. It was not even far. It was about a 70-kilometer stretch. But he moved his family, one commentator said, outside the boundary lines of God. And it's never a good idea to move outside the protection of God. And sometimes we're tempted to do this when things are tough. The others didn't move. They should have stayed put and trusted God to come through and to bring a change. Sometimes it seems a little bit more easier to go over here. The answer might come a little bit quicker. The solution might be a bit more creative. Sometimes it's hard, right, to stay and to wait for God to come through. But it's the safest place we can find ourselves. We have seen in the life of David what happened when he went outside the boundary lines of God, right? We saw the consequences of it. And it's not that God just dumps death on us or destructions on us. It's us moving away from the protection of God. That's all it is. And David eventually came back and he examined his life and he realized how much better and how much safer it is to stay within those boundary lines. Often we think that we miss something out, that God's just, sort of holding stuff away from us without realizing that no, he gives us everything we need for life and godliness. The safest place to be when we go through the storm is standing right next to him. This is what David said in Psalm 16. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. I will praise the Lord who counsels me. Even at night my heart instructs me. I keep my eyes always on the Lord. He will go with him at my right hand. I will not be shaken. Maybe they should have stayed in Bethlehem. They went away and they went to Moab. And Moab actually, the Moabite women were having a little bit of a reputation for running after the boys. So it's not surprising that they married then those two sons. And also what happened there in Moab was that they were worshiping a god who demanded human sacrifice. So away from the giver of life, they came under the God who takes away life. You know, instead of escaping death with this famine, they found death over there. It's good and safe to stay within the boundary lines that God has given us. So tragedy hits this family. Naomi loses her husband, and then she also loses her two sons. Now, place yourself in her shoes if you can. I tried this at home, and I've got two sons, one of them sitting here on the front, and my little one that you saw. And just even going there is devastating. This woman loses her husband. It's one thing if you lose your husband, if you bury your children. You should never, as a parent, have to bury your children, right? It rips your heart right out of your breast. I wonder how she felt now, Naomi. How is your faith now, Naomi? Where are you standing now, Naomi? And we get a glimpse of this beautiful woman and how she kept her faith in God alive in these next few verses. It says there, when Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to visit his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her two daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." Naomi displays a beautiful character there. Her name actually means pleasant, delightful, lovely. She sometimes gets a little bit of a bad rap for being this bitter mother-in-law, but we get to that in a minute. Here she talks about that God has visited his people. That shows me that she has an understanding of who God is and how he works, because this word visit actually stands for that he is still in control. So she hears God is still in control. You know, this woman, through those 10 years in Moab, has also not allowed herself to forget about this God. She still had the God of Judah in her heart. She then talks to the girls and she says to them, "May God show you kindness." Again, that shows me that she understood God's character, because this word kindness is the Hebrew word chesed. And chesed means love, loyalty, goodness, dependability, keeper of his covenant. Naomi knew who this God was, and she did not allow herself, despite her difficult circumstances, to forget about him. She blesses her girls, and she sort of says that he is the keeper of his covenant. He's a loyal God. She is not bitter at that moment. She expresses bitterness in a form to her daughters-in-law in terms that she says that life's really hard. Life's bitter to me. And that's all right to do, isn't it? It's all right to express that life sometimes sucks. It's all right to express these things. It's all right to say, I find it really hard right now, to be honest. But it doesn't mean that she is overwhelmed by bitterness. It doesn't mean that it oozes out of her. How do I know? Well, it's one thing people would argue to follow your mother-in-law in the first place. But it's another thing to follow a bitter mother-in-law, isn't it? Just imagine the girls walking behind Naomi and she goes, "Man, life is hard. It's just difficult and awful and I hate everything. I just hate it. Hurry up, girls. We have to go to Bethlehem." And you know, the first moment when she would say, "And you can just go home if you like," I would go home in an instant. Not so those girls, right? It says here they wept aloud. And they said to her, "We'll go back with you." This is not a bitter mother-in-law at this stage, and I want you to keep that in mind. She tells the girls a second time, go home, girls. I have nothing to offer you. She's absolutely unselfish here because, they could help her, they're young girls. But she says, no, go home. I can't have any more babies for you that you can wait for them to grow up and you marry them. I sometimes think, would the boys want to wait? But that's a different story. Go home. There's nothing for you that I can offer you in Bethlehem. And then Orpah, she decides to go home. She thinks this through. Obviously, she wants to be married. She wants to be back with her family. She leaves. Not so Ruth. It says that Ruth clung to her. She's a clingy little girl. And here we get a glimpse of the transformation that took place in Ruth's heart as well. All through the book of Ruth, the author says it's Ruth the Moabite. Ruth, did I tell you it's Ruth the Moabite? It's like it's her surname, Ruth Moabite. It goes together, just showing that she's from there, that she's one of those women that run after the boys, that she's one of those women that worship this God. But, here in this story with Ruth clinging to her mother-in-law, it shows me that a transformation had took place in this heart of Ruth the Moabite. And this transformation took place by her observing her mother-in-law. I want to be with you. She watched her mother-in-law go through these difficult times, these heartbreaking times. And she, in other words, says, Naomi, you have got something. You've got a strength in yourself to go through these times. I have not once heard you talk bad about your God or talk bad about your people. I want to be with you. I want to go with you. You know what? Marriage doesn't appeal to me anymore. It would be lovely, but it's not the main thing for me to pursue. I want to sacrifice this, and I see something in you, and I see something in your God, and I want to go and follow it. Shows me the beautiful, beautiful character of Naomi and the transformation that took place in Ruth's heart. Sometimes we think when we go through difficult times, we don't want to tell people. We're just all happy and all excited because really, for me, I don't want them to think that God's bad, I don't want to be a bad testimony for them that turn their back on God. But often, in this weird upside-down kingdom that we live in, it's actually the other way around quite often. People watch and observe us, and they see something in us, some strength in us that actually encourages them. I know the story about this family who lost their little boy. And they were actually the only family saved out of a Hindu sort of clan. There were lots of families still, and they were not saved. This were the only Christian, lost their little boy. And he told me because of how their marriage got closer and they're, supporting each other, and because of how they were going through these difficult times with God by their side and with God's people, you hear me? All of their Hindu family got saved. There is a power in our testimony when we are holding on to God. Sometimes we cannot answer the question of why difficult stuff happens, but we can show how we go through these difficult times. Amen? David Atkins says this: faith we are to learn from Naomi sometimes means a willingness to leave such questions in the mystery of God, in the confidence that in the brighter days he has shown himself trustworthy. So we see this in Naomi, and Ruth the Moabite takes a step of faith, moves away from her family and her familiarity and trusts in God. And she says these beautiful words that many of us who got married in the 90s have this on their wedding invitation, so read it. And I know someone in the choir said she did. This is what Ruth said. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. So those two women go together and they arrive in Bethlehem, and remember it's been 10 years that they've been away, and the women in the town come out and greet them, and they see Naomi and they look at her and they say, is it you? Is this you, Naomi? And all of a sudden there's a switch that takes place in Naomi. All of a sudden something happens, and I wonder what it is. I wonder if she has seen all the girlfriends that she left behind, because they all stayed. If she's seen them and how they've grown together and how they are happy together. If she's seen their families and their kids and their babies. I wonder if she all of a sudden thought, man, I could have had all this. I wonder if she got down the track of could have, would have, should have. She actually expresses this bitterness towards God. You know, it's sometimes what we do, you know, when we've gone outside the boundary lines, we say, God, why didn't you stop me going into Moab? God, why did you let us go? Why did you let me press this button? Why did you let me buy this stuff? Why did you let me get involved with these people? God, you in your sovereignty, you could have stopped me. But really, bottom line, we don't want to be stopped by God. We don't want God to take over, and God knows that. He gave us free will that makes him God. He says, you choose. I give you life or death. You choose. And then he can't even hold himself back when you read it in the Old Testament. He says, but choose life. It's the better choice. He gives us choices. And Naomi, I wonder if it suddenly hit her. I actually know that it hit her. And because she says, don't call me Naomi anymore, pleasant and lovely. Call me Mara. Even saying it, Mara. Mara means bitterness. And now she reaches the point where the bitterness owns her. It's a different thing to say my life is bitter or to say I am bitter. I have bitterness inside of me. And she says this sentence where she says, I went away full and the Lord has brought me back empty. And you think, hang on, didn't you go away because you thought you were empty? But she realizes when she sees the women in the town, you know what? I actually had everything I needed right there. I had my family, I had my friend, I had my God, I had my community, I had my husband, I had my children. Everything I ever needed was right here. What's a little bit of bread over there? Why didn't I stay here? I went away full and I came back empty. Sometimes only when we lose something do we know what we really had, isn't it? Let's treat it with kindness and let's be, a unity together. I went away full and I came back empty. And she retrieves in some form of depression and we don't hear anything for the moment from her. Not so Ruth. Ruth at this point does not get dragged down by her mother-in-law's depression. She had every right as well, didn't she? She was Ruth, the Moabite. Imagine her going through the streets of Bethlehem, everybody looking at her. She's one of those who runs after the boys. She worshipped this God. We don't know how she must have felt. She too lost her father-in-law, and she too lost her husband. But she does not allow herself to get dragged down by Naomi's emotions. And she says, I'm going to go to work. Good idea. She said, I'm going to go and glean. Now, this gleaning was a sort of social welfare system that God had put in place for those times for the orphans, the widows, and the foreigners. And what it means in sort of modern term was that, let's say there is a strawberry field farmer in Red Hill. Ever been to the strawberry farm in Red Hill? You get your little basket and you go through and you collect the strawberries. And so the farmer actually comes and he says to his workers, you're only allowed to go through it once, and that's stuff goes to Safeway and Coles. Don't go through a second time. Whatever strawberries you miss or whatever strawberries fall to the floor, these are to be for the orphans, the widows, and the foreigners that will come through. So that's what Ruth decides to do. She gleans. She gleans in a barley field, hence those thingies, they're barley leaves. And the Bible actually says that it just so happened that those two women arrive in Bethlehem during the harvest time. It's almost like the writer wants to use a bit of irony. It just so happened that they arrived at the harvest time. And then it actually just so happened that Ruth came to this field of this man named Boaz. And he just so happened to be a rich, good-standing, noble character, man of God, and he's single. And then it says that it just so happened that that day Boaz came to the fields to have a look how the harvest is going. And it says just so happened that he noticed Ruth. She was on the far end corner outside there. When you have been going with God long enough, when you have read the Bible from cover to cover, nothing just happens with God, right? He is in control. He orchestrates things. He puts the puzzle pieces together. He's right in the middle, constructing something in your life. Nothing just happens. Wherever you find yourself right now, whether you are on the mountaintop or in the valley, rest assured that God is at this moment placing the puzzle pieces of your life together. How do I know? Well, let me tell you how we first came to Australia. It was in 1995, and we are part of a church that kind of fell apart. It was very, very heartbreaking for me. There was a lot of misunderstandings going on. And so we basically had to leave that church. And I found it just very, very difficult. And I thought, where's our future now? What are we doing now? You might not feel that it's so devastating, but it was at that moment for me and for us. But it just so happened that my husband was working for a German power tool company, and they just so happened to have a lot of subsidiaries all over the world. It just so happened that Marcus was working in the finance department and that he was overseeing a couple of these European subsidiaries. It just so happened that there were inconsistency in the finance department in Australia, and they had to send someone over there. And it just so happened that the lady who was actually overseeing Australia fell pregnant, so she didn't want to go. And then it just so happened that they asked Marcus if he could go and if he could sort things out over there. So it just so happened that this company is in Rowville. And so Marcus went there, and it just so happened that he had a weekend off. And it just so happened that he booked a bus trip to the Great Ocean Road. And it just so happened that that bus stopped in a little village where they just so happened to have a little Christian bookshop. Marcus just so happened to have 10 minutes time, so he hopped into this bookshop and he asked the man behind the counter if he knew about a church nearby where his hotel is. His hotel just so happened to be in Glen Waverley. And this man just so happened to have a little flyer of Waverley Christian Fellowship at that time. It just so happened that Marcus the next morning was free to go to church to the 9 o'clock meeting, and he just so happened to go into the visitors lounge, which was over there at that time. It just so happened that he bumped into Kevin Connor, and it just so happened that the two men got talking to each other. It just so happened that Marcus knew of Kevin Connor because it just so happened that Marcus went to a Bible college when he was younger for 2 years in England, where it just so happened to study Kevin Connor's book. It then just so happened that Marcus came home, and the headquarters in Germany decided we need to find a new financial controller for Australia. And then it just so happened that the thought popped into our head, why don't we apply for that? And we applied for that, and it just so happened that they accepted us. And then it just so happened that in March 1996, we came to Australia with 2 little kids. And it just so happened that I had 2 more sons in this church, and it just so happened that we're now part of this beautiful family for 23 years. Nothing just so happened. God can work out all things together for good. Amen. So it just so happened that he notices Ruth. Maybe she was pretty. Well, maybe she was. I mean, she was dusty and dirty for working all day. He noticed her maybe because she was pretty. And then he asked the farmers about her, the other workers, and they said, oh yeah, she's been working really hard. I mean, she hardly took a lunch break. She's a hard worker, and he is really impressed. More impressed than by her looks, he's impressed by her works. And then he hears that this is actually Ruth, the Moabite, the one that came with Naomi, and now he is super impressed. And he instantly promotes her, so normally she would have to eat her lunch outside, and he says, no, come eat with me. He dips his bread in her oil, and she dips her bread in his oil. Now notice she didn't get the promotion because she was good looking or hardworking, but because he heard that she was with Naomi, and he heard about her reputation, and this is what actually won his heart over. He said to himself, he said this to her, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Nice pickup line, huh? It's a really nice phrase here, under whose wings you found protection, because it talks about like a baby bird finding protection under the wings of mama bird. So he's basically saying, you've come into the right boundaries, finding protection and refuge under God's wings. And so Boaz starts to sort of show her a little bit of favoritism, and this first day he gave her a whole bag of strawberries to take home to the mother-in-law. God impressed the mother-in-law. And so Ruth comes with these strawberries, and Naomi says, what happened to you? And she says, well, I've been to this strawberry field, and the owner, his name's Boaz. And instantly Naomi snaps out of her depression. Instantly, she realizes this did not just so happen. God is up to something here. Why? Because Boaz actually is their kinsman-redeemer, their goel. This, again, is another sort of social welfare system that God has put into place, that when a man dies and leaves a widow and leaves her sonless, the next in kin has to marry her and produce a son. But only the next in kin. Boaz, though, was the second. So he wasn't the first. Still, Naomi trusts God that he is up to something. That system wouldn't work today, would it? She trusts God that he's up to something. She starts to make some plans, while Ruth, for the rest of the season, goes and collects strawberries. And Boaz every now and then comes and he leaves extra strawberries for her and tells the workers, she tells her, you don't have to go anywhere else. Stay, it's good here. Stay here. And so he hints sort of his favoritism and his affection to her. He does not make a move, though. He's a very upright, good man of God. He knows he's not the first in line. I'm not to touch Ruth. He could have just gone ahead and marry, but he knows, no, that's not the way to go. So then at the end of the harvest season, Naomi has finished her plan, and she takes Ruth a little bit to the side, and she gives her some dating advice. Now, this is really good stuff. You want to actually write this down. Get your pen and paper ready? Yeah? All good? So this is what she says, Naomi to Ruth in Ruth 4. Wash yourself and put some perfume on. I think this is brilliant. Wash yourself and put some perfume on. The man has seen you all sweaty and dirty, and Ruth could have easily say, like many women unfortunately say, this is how he wanted me, this is how he gets me. No, that's not a good idea. Go wash yourself, put some perfume on, make a little bit of an effort, very nice dress. And I think this is really good marriage-keeping advice as well. Women, sometimes you've got to wash yourself, put some perfume on. What does it mean? When my kids were little and Marcus would come back from work, 5:30, 6 o'clock, I would quickly put the toys away, put a little bit of lipstick on, brush my hair. I don't want him to find me the way he left me. Just show him a little bit, I appreciate that you worked so hard. And if the man is intelligent, which I know you men all are, you husbands all are, then they know she doesn't do this because she's got nothing else to do all day. No, you pick up the signs and know, wow, she washed herself, she put some perfume on because she loves me and she wants to put in some effort. Goes vice versa, by the way. Man, wash yourself. Put some perfume on. Show her she's worth it. Swing by Safeway and buy some flowers and drop them home. Send her a little text message with one of these pumping red hearts. Call her and say, I was just thinking of you, and it took my breath away. You have no idea how many bonus points you collect when you do that. Just wash yourself and put some perfume on. Amen? Second advice she gives her, she says, you got to go where Boaz is. Brilliant stuff. You got to go where Boaz is. He was at that point at the threshing floor watching his crop. Go where he is. Girls, we cannot expect the Boaz in our lives to just crash into our room. We got to go where Boaz is. I know when I was pursuing Marcus, when he went to the prayer meeting, I went to the prayer meeting. When he went out and did evangelism, I was saving people left, right, and center. When he was worship leading, I took singing lessons till I sang like a nightingale. You gotta go where Boaz is. He's not just coming to you. And don't go there with 7 besties on each side approaching the man, because he will be like, no, go by yourself, make yourself available, go where Boaz is. And again, this goes vice versa. Be involved in youth. Be involved in young adults. Just come and go where Boaz is. And so she says, you know what, Boaz has dropped enough strawberries now. You got to tell him that you are interested as well. It's just fair enough to do. Eventually we got to tell them. So Ruth goes and she basically tells him that she wants Boaz to marry her. Now you don't have to do that. I find that that's over the top. I'm too old-fashioned for that. But go and show that you are interested as well. And so Boaz is over the moon. He just waited for Ruth to move, but he still decides to go through the right channels. He is a decent, good, upstanding man. We want to have a man who goes through the right channels and does the right things, right? So Boaz goes, he goes to this first kinsman-redeemer and says, do you want to marry Ruth? He doesn't. So hip, hip, hooray. They're going to get married, Boaz and Ruth, and they have a little baby boy called Obed. Obed is placed on the lap of Naomi, and the whole town is happy, and we could say that that's the end of the story. It would be a great story in itself already here, right? How God brought redemption to these poor widows. However, the story doesn't end there. Little do they know, those 2 women, those 2 widows, that because they put their trust in God, they have been plugged into a legacy that goes way beyond their expectations. And they don't even know how far-reaching the impact of their decision and their faith and their faithfulness was. But we do, right? We have it in the book of Matthew, the beginning of the New Testament. This is what they actually left behind. It says there in Matthew 1, this is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. The worship team can come up now. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac the father of Jacob. Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez the father of Hezron. Hezron the father of Ram. Ram the father of Amminadab. Just have to say it fast and it sounds good. Amminadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Interesting one as well here. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. There we have the Moabite. Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. And it doesn't even stop there. It goes all the way to the time when they go into exile to Babylon, all the time when they come back from exile. And then it finishes like that. Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who's called the Messiah. Little did they know, those 2 women, that they were actually plugged into the great scheme of God's redemption plan. I know that one day they will know, though. I know one day my mother-in-law, she will stand before God and she will think, well, it finished with David and it finished with my little Jaden. But God will say, no. Because of your faithfulness, I'll show you how far it reached. And I know he will grab her hand and he will place her in front of all these people that her faithfulness and her prayer have affected. This ordinary woman just trusting in God, not allowing her to forget about her God. And this is the same for you and me. Sometimes we think what I do is so ordinary, but you never know. Nothing just happened. Where God plugs you in, every one of us, in his plan of the great scheme that he has of the redemption of all mankind. Amen. I want to read something to you to finish off from David Atkinson. He says this: David's life in terms of physical descendant was linked to the story of a Moabite girl gleaning in a barley field many miles from home, to a caring mother-in-law and a loving kinsman, to a nighttime conversation at the threshing floor, to the willingness of a wealthy farmer to go beyond the requirements of law in his care for the needy. In short, it is in the ordinariness of the events of lives of ordinary people that God is working his purpose out. Our faith, our ordinary lives, our decisions too are part of God's providential and gracious care. We today are part of the covenant families whose first father was Abraham and which also gave a welcome to Ruth, the girl from Moab. The God who called Ruth is the God who calls us in Christ. May we, like Ruth, pledge our willing and loving obedience in response to God's gracious invitation to enjoy our place under the refuge of his wings. And all God's people say, Amen. Let's stand together.